The Lord be with you. This is a reading of the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus went to his own part of the country, followed by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, Jesus began to teach in the synagogue in a way that kept his large audience amazed. They kept asking, where did Jesus get all this? What kind of wisdom is he endowed with? And how is it that such miraculous deeds are accomplished by Jesus' hands? Isn't he a carpenter, the son of Mary, a brother of James, Joseph, Judas, Simon? Aren't his sisters our neighbors here? They found Jesus too much for them. And Jesus' response to all this was, no prophet is without honor, except in his native place, among his own kindred, and in his own house. Jesus could work no miracle there, apart from curing a few who were sick by laying hands on them. So much did their lack of faith distress him. Jesus made the rounds of neighboring villages instead and spent his time teaching. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. The good thing about the way the lectionary was set up for ordinary time, which we're in right now, through the summer into the fall and until around Thanksgiving time, is that every Sunday the gospel comes from the same gospel. And this year we're in the year Mark, and so it always comes from the Gospel of Mark. And the most important thing is that it's sequential. So literally Sunday after Sunday, if you're going to Mass every Sunday, and then not going to ask for a show of hands. And not going to talk about money. I mean, so you can sit in the front row and be safe. Where was it? And so it's sequential. And so, like last week, we had a story from Mark chapter 5, and this week we're having a story from Mark chapter 6. And so you kind of look at them like in a context and say, what do these two stories have to do with each other? Well, the two stories shows the progress of Jesus' mission and ministry once he had started collecting disciples, which were following him, walking with him from village to village in Upper Palestine, up and around Galilee. And so you kind of put yourself in the position of a disciple, which we all are, amen. We all have a relationship with Jesus in our discipleship. And so we just kind of put ourselves here as one of the disciples who's going with Jesus from village to village. And last week, as you know, if you were at church, that it was a healing story. It was a story of two healings, actually. And one of the healings had to do with the daughter of Jairus, who was the head of the local synagogue. And she was a girl of 12, and she was dying. And Jairus went directly up to Jesus as soon as he got out of the boat from the Sea of Galilee. Please come and lay your hands on my daughter so that she may get well and live. Okay? And Jesus went. And then in the midst of his going, it seemed like a whole interruption happened with this woman, an adult woman, who had this hemorrhage for 12 years. And she had sought medical help from doctors of every sort, and none of them could help her. And she ran out of money, and she was now getting worse, and so she was becoming terminal. But she was also declared unclean because she was a woman with hemorrhage, which means she couldn't go to church, couldn't be in the synagogue for 12 years, nor could she approach any man. And Jesus was a man. Okay. So she thought, if I just come up behind him and just touch his clothes, just come up and touch his clothes, I will be healed. And so she didn't let any of this stand in the way. No doctors could help. She was now becoming terminal. She had no more money. She wasn't allowed in the synagogue. She couldn't go to church. She couldn't be around any men, but she could come up and she could put her hand on the cloak of Jesus, and she said, if I just do this, I will get well. And she was. And she was. And even more important, when Jesus and the woman were face to face, he revealed to her and to everybody listening, which all had judged the woman as it's her fault that she has this terminal illness and she's now broke and she's been out of the synagogue for 12 years. She must be a horrible sinner. Jesus is declaring to her and about her that, woman, your faith has healed you. You have such faith that it is actually healing of a terminal illness. And the next Sabbath, she was right there in the front row of the synagogue. And her story was known to the whole village from then on. That's Mark chapter 5. And now we go to Mark chapter 6, and it says Jesus is going to his own country. Well, in the Matthean version and the Lucan version, you find out that's Nazareth. So this is Jesus' hometown. This is where he was raised. This is where all his relatives are. Okay? And every one of those three Gospels says he went back there. He had already started to gather disciples. His ministry, his mission, his preaching, his miracle working, his exorcism had already begun to build up esteem. And here he was taking this back to his own hometown, which you would think these would be people who would be receptive to him because they already knew him, they were already related to him. And all three Gospels say no, they weren't. They were not receptive to him at all. Okay? And in Mark, you get it most clearly why. Okay? So everybody fold your arms. Everybody put on a judgmental face. You can look at me judgmental. I promise I won't go to those three topics. You can do it. And they all sat there with their arms folded, judging Jesus, saying to themselves and each other, people talk in church, saying, you're a carpenter. Your dad was a carpenter, your granddad was a carpenter, your great-granddad was a carpenter, you're a carpenter, and that's all you are. Okay? You're a carpenter. In Nazareth, that's all you are. You're not a rabbi, you're not a miracle worker, you're not a prophet, and you're not the Messiah. You're just a carpenter. We know your mother, we know your brothers, we know your sisters. Okay? Get back in your place. Your place. You have stepped out of your place. You have stepped above your place. Get back in your place. We find you too much for us. And they close their minds and they close their hearts. So what happened? You can unfold your arms and you can not be so judgmental, unless you want to be judgmental of me. What happened? Okay, did he turn them into a pillar of salt? Did he send down plagues, fire and brimstone, flood? Did he do any of that? No, didn't do any of that. What did he do? Nothing. He did absolutely nothing and then left with his disciples. Okay? Go back in your mind, you're a disciple. Okay? Here you go to this village, same Jesus, same ministry, same power, same message. Here you go to this village, and this woman with a hemorrhage is healed, and this little girl of 12 is raised from the dead, and these people are left behind in the synagogue every Sunday. So every time you come to the synagogue, you are reminded by their very presence of who Jesus is, okay, and what he can do, okay? And most likely, from those miracles, more disciples were following Jesus. So you get the picture? The band of disciples was increasing the more Jesus went from village to village, except the village of Nazareth. Didn't pick up any disciples. Didn't cure anybody. Didn't exorcise any demon. Nazareth was the same after Jesus left as it was before, because their lack of faith, because they were judgmental. Okay. So what's the message for us people? The way I see it for myself, this is just getting personal here, we're given the two extremes of people with such great faith that healing of a terminal illness actually happens. And we're given the opposite extreme of such lack of faith, such closed-mindedness, such closed-heartedness, such, no matter who God sent, they were going to find something wrong, something missing. And so nothing happens. Okay? And where are we in the midst of that? Where am I in the midst of that? I hope and pray to God I am not at this extreme. But I also know in honesty I'm not at this extreme. Okay? And the reason why I say I'm not at this extreme, not just because I've never been cured of a terminal illness by my faith. I mean, you could use that as one standard. But the other standard is that this woman had every reason to be a total victim thinker. Had every reason to believe that she was a total victim of this disease, and therefore even when Jesus of Nazareth came, she was going to stay stuck as a victim. Everybody had already judged her. Everybody had already condemned her. Everybody already told her it's her fault. She could stay stuck in that judgment, but she didn't. She did not allow the judgment of other people to keep her stuck in that victim place. Would not allow it. Refused to allow it. Now, she was desperate. She was broke, and she was terminal. She was desperate. And we don't like to do desperate, amen? I mean, I want to show of hands on this. How many do not want desperate anywhere near you? We don't. We don't, for very good reason. We don't. We don't want to go anywhere near that. But she was there, and not of her own fault. Sometime, maybe it's in the desperate that you find your faith. You find a bedrock of faith. You don't find a faith that just came from a book. You don't find a faith that just came from a ritual. You don't find that this came from your mama or your daddy or a guy in robes. You find a faith that comes from the bottom of your heart. You have to make a choice. Am I going to stay stuck here, or am I going to get out of this place and believe that God can make something of my life that I can't and nobody else is either? And that's where she was. And that's what she did. And that's why Jesus singled her out. Of everybody in that village, she was the holiest person in the village. She was holier than Jairus. Because he doubted. He doubted. When he found out that his daughter had died, he said, didn't believe Jesus could raise her from the dead. But Jesus did. You know. That's the message. And that's the opposite of the message. That you just stay stuck in the judgment, or you stay stuck in the victim thinking, And what happens? Well, frankly, nothing. Nothing happens. You're just left to your own devices. And frankly, that's not where you want to be. That's not where you want to be.